But let's, of course, first start with what is happening in Europe. And this is happening for the first time where far-right and populist parties are clearly and simultaneously leading the polls in Germany, France and Britain, that are Europe's three largest economies. A new survey in Germany by broadcaster RTL has put the alternative for Germany at about 26%, polling well ahead of the ruling Christian Democrats at 24% for the first time. Now, the party is under surveillance by Germany's intelligence services over suspected extremism. The far-right AfD came second at 152 seats in the recently concluded elections. They also have achieved a bit of a historic success with a big victory in the provincial elections last year. Now, in France, Marine Le Pen's national rally has long led the polls ahead of the 2027 presidential elections, and France's Marine Le Pen barred from running for the public office after conviction in the fake job trial. But Le Pen's 29-year-old protege, Jordan Bardella, is emerging as the new anti-immigration face of the French far-right. Now, finally, in Britain, Nigel Farage's Reform UK has topped most surveys since April. He's on course to breaking the Labour-Tory duopoly for power in Britain. In a recently concluded local polls, Nigel Farage's Reform UK has booked a massive victory. And just about a decade ago, the far-right were politically isolated for their conservative ideas. But the surge of anti-immigration sentiment has now pushed these parties in positions of power across many European nations. Now, Italy and Hungary already have governments that are led by the right-wing conservatives. Now, the next round of elections in Britain and Germany aren't until 2029, and in France, it is in 2027. There is no guarantee that these parties will govern, but the trend shows that they will remain a political force to reckon with, and in the days to come could even grow stronger. All right, now to help us make sense of what's happening in European politics, we joined this broadcast by Mr. Adam Schwartz, who's a writer and also a political commentator. Mr. Schwartz, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. It appears to be a sort of a trend across some of the biggest nations in Europe that the far right seems to be gaining more and more popularity. Now, I want you to first weigh in, as you're joining in from London, on Nigel Farage and his Reform UK party. Till about a decade ago, Nigel Farage was seen as an outsider, a fringe element, but he seems to be right in the centre of British politics, where he seems to be now leading the Labour in the polls that are being put out. What is the reason for his popularity?
Well, I think there's quite a long history to really why Farage is now leading the polls with his Reform UK party. And it really goes back to the election in 2010 when the Conservatives ended a long period of Labour being in power, and they basically inherited a very poor financial situation, which meant that they decided to implement what we called austerity, which was vast public sector cuts and cuts across public services here in the UK, which really caused a lot of economic damage, but also led to a lot of poor socio-economic conditions as well. And of course, I think that really played a big role in terms of why people voted to leave the European Union at the 2016 election, of which, of course, Nigel Farage was one of the leading figures. So, of course, really, until very recently, Farage was one of the major figures who was really kind of pushing forward this idea that the UK should leave the European Union. And really what happened was, over the past 5 years after that, is that, the UK government became so consumed with trying to pursue Brexit that it really deteriorated and led to not really following through on any other policies. So what that led to was a major victory by the Labour Party at the last election. And really, Labour Party hasn't really met the aspirations or the expectations of many voters here in the UK, which meant that over the past 15 years, voters have tried both main parties and actually not been happy with either, which is why they're kind of turning to Farage, even though he was kind of responsible ultimately for the disastrous Brexit policy.
Yeah, but they're not just turning for another alternative. Parties across Europe that are far right, who have a far right agenda, are the ones who seem to be clearly leading in polls. You've got the Alternative for Germany party in Germany. You've got Marine Le Pen's party in France. Why is it that parties that are far right leading in terms of their agenda gaining this kind of a popularity? Is it immigration, or is it a stagnant economy of Europe that is now pushing people again towards these far right agendas?
Well, I think there are several, reasons why the far right are really emerging across Europe, really for the first time, as you mentioned in your introduction, for the first time since the Second World War. And obviously they are largely based on local issues, but I think there are trends really that follow all far right parties across Europe. I think that broadly, I would say, kind of fall into three main areas. The first, I would say, is the poor socio-economic conditions that have resulted from the Great Recession, from the COVID pandemic, and the economic fallout of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And really, over the last 15 years, voters across Europe have trusted mainstream parties to try to resolve those, and now ultimately electorates haven't really been happy with the results. So of course they are turning to populists who basically offer false, very quick fix solutions, which sound very tempting to voters, but in reality actually make things much worse. I think you also have a sort of movement within far right parties themselves who kind of have essentially decided to have quite cosmetic change in a way to basically market themselves to be kind of less synonymous with the traditional far-right narratives, let's say, that we saw in the Second World War and the symbolism, while maintaining their existing ideology. So, for example, instead of talking about racial purity, they now talk about cultural identity. So I think, that has kind of been a process of detoxification to kind of market themselves to appeal to a wider audience, which is clearly working. But I think there's also this other element, which is really, over the past 20 years, we've seen an emergence of a kind of unregulated social media, which has really created safe space for the far right to actually project their narratives and really to radicalize populations in which way they weren't doing before. So I think the kind of chain reaction of all of those together has led to this surge in the far right.
Interesting. We'll have to see as to how politics across Europe unfolds. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Adam Schwartz, for joining us with that perspective there.
Good to be with you.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.